get off earlier on that video. I thought I was going to leave episode 1 as just a singular part, but I want to come and update some things and add some thoughts that, well, they weren't in there. First, I want to correct, and I know this is a common American mistake, so I'm going to do my emotional labor to make sure I create an appropriate distinction in my mind. As I said, Dutch culture, and it was Danish culture, and I've learned a little bit. There's some key differences in there, especially geographically, and I did put a correction in the description box of the other video. So, and I know a lot of folks, unfortunately, part of some of the colonizer attitude is, oh, who cares? I care. It's important to make a distinction. But some interesting things are happening, and I want to talk about them and then link into the Lightworker stuff and talk about why, for me, this is light work, and just some interesting kind of synchronicities that I want to point out, make a notable note of right now, and we'll see where they go. So, first of all, what I find interesting, so that conversation that just, is very simple, like just speaking up and saying, that seems kind of mean. Like, I worry about the people for whom it's not. I worry about the subcontext of what that means, and I worry about the people for whom it's not consensual, that it's bullying. Now, what's interesting is a lot of people are commenting on that, and I've had 2 experiences now, especially with white women, and also with white men from other cultures. I don't know if I mentioned it in the other video, but on Facebook I decided that I was going to boost a post. It was an astrology post, just about things going on, and I was like, you know what, I've never really advertised outside the US. I should open it up. So I opened it up, UK, Australia, Eastern Asian countries and stuff like that, and I don't know why, but it like targeted Australians, and they were super, like, those that got it. There was not a single person that was like, "Yay, I'm really glad to see this," or at least they didn't speak up. But I'm also keenly aware that, one, it's usually the triggered that are the loudest, not the healed, and it's usually I know there's a reason for this going on. I'm not sure what it is. I'm really glad to have done all the work I have in the twin flame journey, though, because I'm not taking it as a personal offense, but I'm just noticing, and I'm learning about it. It's like, okay, this is interesting. So I've had a bump up with Australian culture, all right, and they're extremely offended at the idea of astrology. I'm not sure why. I've been trying to look that up. I think other than just colonizer culture of, if you don't go with the mainstream, or if you get into metaphysics and those are more dominant than others, then it's acceptable to be offensive. And I'm not just talking about people who are like, this is hogwash. I mean, they went like more immediately for trying to like personally offend me. And it was like, well, that's a weird response, but okay. And I mean, I did talk somewhat in the astrology of how, like, it's ending to, old colonizer energies. And so I think some of that got in there, but I most of them, it seems like, didn't even fully read it, like just the main offense on the astrology. I'm like, okay, all right, there's a thing there. I just turned off the ad for a while. I'm like going, well, we're heading into Mercury retrograde anyways, probably not the best time for new advertisements, but good to note. Okay, something keen with Australia. And I know that they're having a lot of challenges also with people who are questioning what governments are saying that everybody should do. Then, so going back to the Danish interaction, what I find interesting is, like, the first 2 people that I had interacted with, when I said the first part of it, like, this just seems mean. Like, it seems sexist, and it seems like it would create a lot of subcontext for unmarried women, and it's like the vestiges of Christianity. And that conversation, like, pretty much died. Like, that those people never really said much back. And I know that I don't know a lot, and so I realized, I was like, okay, somehow, like, this is more, like, a lot of it is white culture in any place. Like, I recognize that this is white fragility and white privilege, and a lot of these cultures were established before America was too, and it's where we get it from, and but I was thinking, like, I think there's something more to this going on, though. Like, there's got to be something else, and especially because somebody made the comment of, leave Danish culture alone. And I'm going, isn't that interesting that a small dissenting opinion could cause so many new people to come on, and it's like they really are afraid that me just speaking the opinion, and it's not like I'm not fighting anybody. I had the last few things that I said, and it'll probably be the last few things that I will say, because I kind of want to just observe this and see what's going on. The last few things I said, what to somebody that tried to shut me down on it, tried to things like that, is I said, you know, I'm really praying for your healing ancestors. I don't typically say, like, I pray for you. I don't like using prayer as a weapon, and there's consent involved. So I can't, like, I'm not going to pray for people who don't want prayers gone. I might send something to their guides, and when they're ready for it, they do it. But typically, I'm looking more at who are the people whose voices are not being heard while these loud, offended voices are being heard. And I send out prayer energy to those people. If you're listening to this, I encourage you to the people who, you know, let's say in this situation, to the women who feel pressured into it by their fellow women in this culture, and they don't want to do it, but they don't want to be seen as bad, or they don't want to be seen as a part of the Me Too movement. And I'm going to segue into what was interesting is I just left it very simply at, I pray for your healing ancestors. That's it, because I'm sure they had ancestors that got conditioned into this too. I'm sure they didn't start out that way, you know. And then the other thing that I said to someone else, which they were the person that updated me, and like that it's not Dutch, it's Danish. And I said, thank you. I will make sure I do the emotional labor to make a distinction in my mind. I appreciate the feedback on the difference between Dutch and Danish. And I said that specifically because I'm not retracting any of the other stuff that I said. I'm not going to fight. I'm aware already, and I've done enough light work, and I'm going to share it in the Chronicles, that I know that, like, a lot of us get bound up in this whole, we need to fight with people, we need to win an argument, when a lot of times you'd be amazed how much just that little voice speaking up, just saying a couple of things, a couple of compassionate things, and also recognizing what are the reflections in it, right? So, and I'm going to touch on that too. So what I did, though, is I was going, you know, what's interesting is what I spoke to was that at an earlier comment, I said, I doubt that it's consensual for everybody. And that should be a fair statement, right? But we see this a lot in America too. Like, a person of color might say, hey, there's statistics over here that say that y'all are doing things that are hurting us that you don't recognize that you're doing. And that person might go, don't mess with things how they've been. Or it's been, you know, like my dad, it's been like this for how many thousands of years, and da 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 da. And they get offended at that idea. It's like the notion of the growth creates such a dissonance in the mind that it almost does. It feels like you're trying to erase an entire culture. In any case, I wanted to know more, though. I was like, okay, so one, I want to know, is there anything that's put out that suggests that, like, everybody in Danish culture is totally safe and fine, especially with Pluto bringing up a lot of the energies of sexism and consent and racism and things like that. And I looked it up, and no, it's not. In fact, what I found was interesting. They were one of the, like, the Danish cultures were some of the cultures that were supposed to be the fairest and the most equal to women. And for a long time, they were thought to be, until the Me Too movement came out. And I'm kind of up and down about the Me Too movement. I'm glad that it's brought about the information it has. I just don't resonate with the victim consciousness anymore. And I was kind of in a weird space with that at first. And this is funny, this is part of where I can resonate with what I learned about what's going on in Danish culture right now. And what I found was interesting was that they had their first woman prime minister, and then the Me Too movement came out. And it's almost like reminiscent to me of, like, when we started, when women's suffrage started. And it was like, and we still see a lot of this now, but it was more highlighted then, is like, we would bully each other into going, well, that's not ladylike, or, you know, you like it. You know, like we would do stuff like that. And they're going through something, like I looked it up. This is a 2020 article. So this is stuff that recently has been coming up. And they're experiencing similar clashes to what we are, although it's a little more thorough in like the majority of the culture. If you try to stop them and say, would you like to talk about feminism or intersectional feminism, they don't have the time for it. What's interesting is, like, one of the articles talked about it's perfectly acceptable for and I'm still learning about this, so if anyone wants to correct feedback, I'm happy to do that. This is a part of what I'm showing is the learning journey, because a lot of times we don't get on until we feel like we know all the facts, and then because we're afraid to be corrected. It's okay if there's some correction someone wants to provide. I'm open. I'm actively learning. But what it was saying was, in their culture, the intent is more important than the impact, which is a contrast, because what we're learning in U.S. culture is that impact is often more important than intent. Not that intent is not important, but a lot of the consent, I would say rape culture, is that the intent is more important than the impact. And so currently in Danish culture, like, if a man or woman wants to come, and it's mostly men too, women, but I'm just going to include everybody. If someone wants to come up and grab your butt, what they count as more important was, were you doing it just for fun? Or were you doing it to be mean or to violate consent? Which is where you get that slippery slope. That's what we're kind of alchemizing right now in America, is like, you could go up and be bullying somebody and touch them in ways that are inappropriate and non-consensual, but in that kind of culture, if you say, oh, it was just good fun, it's acceptable. Now, I'm sure many of you probably recognize that we have had those same challenges here, right? And right now, at least going by the most popular articles, I'm going to dig through and make sure that I look for articles that are not just mainstream. I think that's an important value to do, and not just stop at the first page. So where I'm starting in my learning in this is that most Danes do not want to be associated with that sort of feminism, and they're quite upset at the idea that anything that they might do that is sexist or is oppressive or is inappropriate would offend anyone else's sensibilities. Like me saying, this seems kind of mean. And what's interesting too, I had this comment in my head, is like, I mean, we have some mean ass fucking white women and white men in American culture, but my experience so far, and it's not just one person, it's a lot of people, because it's the internet, so a lot of people can access it. Is like, there's a lot of people there. Like, and it's not even, I can imagine how it would be for a person of color coming into Danish culture, trying to do this stuff, or into Australian culture. And I know that both have their challenges with the indigenous peoples where they are. Although in Australia, the indigenous people there are people of color, whereas they're not considered that in a lot of Scandinavian cultures and the Norse cultures of those areas. But they're still treated the same, which is interesting. Like, looking at that's part of the light work, like looking at the context of how we are as humans to other human beings, right? But what I found was interesting was, like, okay, I was like, why am I, just this one little person? And I mean, I've seen other comments that people are like, that's fucked up, and I just said, that seems a little mean. Now, it's in text, and it's people that are, I mean, they're English speakers, clearly, but I know that English is not the same as Danish. And so there's a fair amount of context in there. Also, from what I've been learning, they very much like their sarcasm, and they feel offended at the idea of having to be politically correct, which kind of made me laugh a little bit, because that's what white fragility is. That's what we talk about when we talk about that in terms of, decolonizing and racism, is that we get offended at the notion of needing to be politically correct, and then also want others to be politically correct. So it's like, you can see this rebound into where I made a comment that was politically incorrect for their culture, and they wanted me to, what I found was interesting. So this is the part of it, is like, I brought up some valid points. I did not attack a single person. I even said, I'm not worried about for those whom this is consensual. I'm worried about for those whom it is not consensual. And one of the remarks was, well, of course it's consensual, if it wouldn't, it'd be assault. And it's like, Okay, and that's where I went and did my research, and it's like, but you've got all sorts of assault going on over there. So your view of it being consensual is a part of that conditioned culture, and you're not looking into those for whom are being assaulted with it or who are being guilted into it. And the interesting thing is, that's as they say, American politically correctness, right? But they want me to also be politically correct with them and not remark on it at all, and it quite aggressively so. And I'm going, first of all, this is interesting. Like, in the past, I would have been like, oh no, I offended somebody. And now I'm going, okay, I'm gonna make sure that I'm being sensitive to other cultures, that I'm learning about them, that I'm learning to communicate with people, that this isn't like, the intent and impact are balanced in the conversations being had. And I'm considering, like, why was I called to this? Especially now, like, why was I called to this particular situation? I know that Spirit knew and my guides knew that it was going to go like it has. So why was I called to that? And I'm examining what I'm seeing going on in conversation with me there, and I'm seeing the similarities to what, like, I've been doing a fair amount of light work also in helping to stand up, like, I'm trying to help lift up POC voices, other TikTokers, YouTubers, and stuff, and to be that person who does the emotional labor with the other white people who are either lazy or not understanding or offended. And just speaking up, you know, half the time, most of what I say is, did that make you feel better to say that when it's like a mean thing? Or do you have empathy for this experience? Just bringing light to it. Because I see a lot of people trying to go into the battle, but they're just as triggered and just as offended. And while I get that, I totally get that, it often doesn't help. Like, reactiveness doesn't help, right? So that's where I'm going, okay, Spirit, why did you bring me into this, why did you put this in front of me? Why was it one of those things that I felt like I definitely not needed to comment on, but felt bold enough to comment on, even in what for me feels like a polite way? And especially, you know, recognizing how much I didn't know in it. But what I saw in there is like, it quickly went from talking about the aspect of, what does this mean for women that don't want it? What does this mean? And somebody, I said in part one, like, somebody had said, you know, I would understand if I lived there. And it was like, okay, I understand what you think that's going on here, that there's a cultural misunderstanding. And the truth is, there was, though I was also correct in saying, I don't, like, this seems more like vestiges of Roman Christianity. The sexism, the marriage aspect, the embarrassment, the shame, and stuff like that. And it's like, yes, I get it. I was that person before who totally was into hazing because it was culturally accepted. And same thing with not speaking up about racism. It's still much more culturally acceptable to keep quiet. And in the times that I've spoken up about it on this channel too, have been in a space where there's been a few people that are like, oh gosh, there's another person. Like, it's much more culturally acceptable to be that way. And what sucks is, like, it exists like that. It's really discompassionate. But anyways, so what I'm noticing though is, like, in this conversation is, like, there's new people coming on. I have a sense that they're being called in by the person who created the video, either unintentionally through their thoughts, because what I brought up, like, I wasn't offended that they were offended with what I said. I just was trying to be sensitive. It's a different culture, and I want to be sensitive to all cultures, though I'm recognizing the intersectionality of where these things play out, right? And I'm going, okay, so this is interesting. And I recognize this from libertarian arguments too, political arguments. It went from, we're talking about a traditional thing that you guys do, and all I simply said was, I'm concerned for those for whom feel shamed into it. And the subcontext of what this is saying subconsciously to women. And this is a culture that is very, it's interesting. It's like they were thought, especially by us in the US, to be the most equal, the most feminist, and they're actually one of the least. And they condition themselves into getting into this space, and I'm seeing it. One of the last things that I remarked on in terms of, like, somebody had said, like, was it, leave this culture alone. And like I said, I'm going, wow, you see, my one voice is powerful enough to hurt your culture. that's a pretty big trigger. Like, and that's a pretty big power. Like, and I'm thinking about the people there and all the stuff that I was reading about the various different things over time. And then with the Me Too movement coming in and going, you really do see that though. It really does feel like that. And I'm wondering, like, I mean, it's a lot like we see of, I'm going to say, the mass hysteria when we feel like things are threatened here. Like, we're seeing a fair amount of that going on. Those are Pluto Saturn aspects in there. And I see that they're going from talking about the topic to, trying to force what they feel like is correct. Of course it's consensual, because that creates all sorts of dissonance in the mind. And then going to, don't attack our culture, which I even was respectful in saying, I own how much I do not know about Danish culture. That's why I'm talking about this aspect here, where I recognize that we have similar things. And then I said to the person, I hear you, and I definitely send prayers to your healing ancestors, because I recognize that same kind of bullying that goes on here. And I think that's going to be one of the last things that I left, other than the other one is thank you for the feedback on the difference between the Dutch and the Danish. It feels like that was the aspect of the light work. And this is where I want to point out a couple of things, because your light work might be different, or you might have something similar to what I'm experiencing. But it's not so much about, like, some of the colonizer attitude is, I need to go and change this. And I'm sitting here in my mind, and like, there's a part of my mind that's like, I feel awful for the people that it's not consensual for, in terms of fully informed, enthusiastic consent. Like, if you're pressured, if you're coerced, if it's systemic like that, you don't really have a choice, because it feels like the opposite choice would create negative consequences. And it's kind of like if you got shocked every time you said no, and then we do it to each other, and we keep doing it to each other. So then I'm thinking about, okay, just little old me, and I acknowledge I've got big energy and big power, and especially if Spirit wanted to put me in that position. And I'm going, okay, so what they're used to, and I observed some of the other conversations with people that spoke up to, because it's TikTok and it goes around to all sorts of people. And a lot of those people got offended, and it became a big old fight. And I'm going, okay, I think part of the backlash on this isn't just the cultural, that they don't want to be boxed into political correctness, either their own or ours, while also wanting to stay in theirs. It's an interesting dynamic. But there are other people who are more aggressive about it. And I see this happen when I approach racism here in American, I was going to say, I don't know what the word is, like online and in person, is there, it feels like if people feel personally attacked when you say the behavior you're doing is racist. The way that you're behaving is oppressive. It's blind or privileged or entitled. There's an offense to it. And a lot of times we see this reactiveness where somebody will come in and say, that's fucked up. And then the other person reacts, they mirror that, and there's all this clashing. And I'm going, okay, so I was brought into this just in a similar way as when I'm doing light work to help uplift people of color, to be the person talking with other white people, because it's exhausting to continue answering the same questions and the same sarcastic remarks and things like that over and over again when you've already been oppressed by a system and by people who won't even acknowledge what they're doing. It's a similar thing. It's like most people are not used to somebody coming in who is not reactive, not offended, and who understands. Like, I don't think any of them they don't know me well enough to have any personal offense towards me. And I wasn't personally offended by the woman putting it up. I actually wanted to ask questions about, like, what is the impact of this socioeconomically. But before I could even get to that point, it was already, don't ask questions, don't challenge this. And there's a fair amount of that here too. This is what we mean when we talk about intersectionality. Like, it goes through all sorts of cultures all over the world, and this is how imbalances of power work. And I know that a lot of the downloads that I've been getting, especially with the beings that want to work with me, is that this is part of it, is understanding it, bringing it to the light. That's part of the light work of it. And like I said, I'm going, okay, guys, why did you bring me into this particular conversation? I feel like I have some stability in American culture. Like, I know what a lot of the psychological, socioeconomic impacts are. I know what I don't know. And I know there's, I know a lot more, and there's a lot more comfort. So why bring me to this page if the people were going to react this way? And it's like, and I realized, oh, part of it is because I'm not reactive. Part of it is because, like, at this point, I can sit and observe it and not take it as like that I did something personal, or that, I don't know, I'm kind of torn. Like, do I have the power to, like, totally unravel an entire culture? I don't know, you tell me. Like, do I have that just by, like, a couple of comments on one person's video? Maybe Spirit's gonna show me that, like, by just having gentle conversations. And somebody had even said something later when I'd stopped commenting about save your prayers for those who want them, not even acknowledging I didn't send prayers to anybody there that felt like they were comfortable in what was going on. What shows me is they don't really feel comfortable in it, but I wasn't sending prayers to them. I literally said prayers to your ancestors, because what I'm thinking about is, where did this start? And if you feel called to it when you see similar situations like that, it's nice to send that energy, first of all, because time isn't linear, and secondary, because that's, if you send healing to the roots, and it is very likely the indigenous peoples of each of these cultures that got Romanized and conquered, that were the ones crying out and saying, please don't do this to us, don't erase our culture, don't erase us, don't make us do it the way that you do it. And your guides will make sure that it goes to those with whom it's consensual for. But definitely, I want it, because I've seen people do that. Don't use prayer as a weapon. It doesn't mean you can't speak up about it and say, I'm praying in this situation. But don't use it as a weapon. That defeats the purpose of it. In any case, what's in my mind about it is like, that's so interesting that there's such great offense to this. Then when I read about it, it's like, okay. So for me, it was when I saw those reactions, I could feel parts of old me too that would have been very triggered and offended by somebody being offended at what I said. Though I've had enough conversations and been bold enough to make enough mistakes and be corrected, that I recognize these sort of conversations similarly to when I'm helping educate about racism or lifting up POC in these situations, that it's not, one, it doesn't help to take it as a personal offense that they're offended at me, and two, it's important to look at the context. A lot of this is conditioning. So, like, if you and me were to talk about this stuff, it would be, and regardless of what culture you come from, in my mind, I'm thinking there's a lot of conditioning, a lot of subconscious, compartmentalized conditioning, and that helps me have compassion for other people. And that's when the energy, oh no,